Well, we want to welcome people as they come in. We're thrilled to have everybody here today. Uh, Here we are in Connecticut on a very hot summer day. It's Connecticut in the US, 94 degrees at least, maybe more. It might be closer to 100 by now. So welcome everybody. As you come in, we highly encourage you to use the chat to let us know where you're from. And we'll use that as we move through the session. So please feel free to put your name and where you're from, what university you're from. I see we have a couple of people here that are what I would call repeaters. They've been here before, so welcome back. We're absolutely thrilled today with this great opportunity for, hello, Tom, I see you, to have a University of Rhode Island. Well, here we go. Watch the chat. We have New York with us. Oh, Ireland, welcome. These Canada, welcome. Tom, are you in Idaho? There you go. Texas. So from all over the US and other countries, we have really started to expand beyond the local, and this whole focus on UDL 3.0 is really near and dear to our hearts. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Today, just as a reminder, please, we're recording this session, so please stay muted, but use the chat. And at some point, our presenters, which I will introduce in a minute, may ask you to participate in various activities. So we highly encourage you to do that. For those, did I just make that mark on the screen? For those of you that are not familiar, Goodwin University is in East Hartford, Connecticut, and UDL is our special expertise. We've been working with UDL since 2016, and we're really excited. The webinars are brought to you by Goodwin University's Institute for Learning Innovation and our Center for Teaching Excellence. My colleagues here from Goodwin are going to put some links in the chat to the recordings and also to information about our UDL conference, which is happening on October 17th here in Connecticut, East Hartford, Connecticut, on campus. It's a small conference with limited ability to bring in a lot of people, and that makes it super special because it's very small and intimate. So who we have with us today is Paula Garcia Cardona and Caitlin Lucas. Paula is from Universidad de los Andes in Colombia, and Caitlin Lucas is at the Central European University in Austria. Today, they're going to talk about inclusive assessment and feedback, particularly bringing in generative AI, which I'm super excited about. Those of you that know me, I'm really pumped about AI. I'm finding all sorts of ways to use it that helps not only me, but the faculty that I supervise. And if I did not introduce myself, let me do that now. I'm the Dean of the School of Applied Liberal Arts and Social Sciences at Goodwin University. And without further ado, I am going to stop my screen sharing and let Caitlin go ahead and share her screen. She's going to quote unquote do the driving of the PowerPoint that she's going to present. And Caitlin, please go ahead. And thanks everybody. Continue to use the chat and we'll monitor that.
Is everyone seeing my slides?
Perfect.
Well, thank you everybody for being here. Caitlin and I are very excited to be part of this series of conferences. We've been working together for a couple of years now. And what brought us together was specifically UDL. We started by designing a workshop for members of the Open Society University network to talk about this. And we realized how much we need to know, learn, and talk about UDL. So we decided to keep working, and now we're writing a chapter on UDL and pedagogy, democracy, well, democracy. And we've been experimenting with UDL in our classes as well. And so we've been sharing what we've been doing. So what we're going to do today is to share with you our experimentation, basically. And our agenda for today, we want to, I guess we can skip this, or Caitlin, do you want to introduce yourself very quickly, apart from what Diana said?
Oh, I think just one thing that is really wonderful working with Paula is her experience as a professor doing a lot of teaching with UDL and teacher training. I'm more on the side of academic technology at Central European University. So I don't get the opportunity to teach as much, but I do a lot of teacher development for higher education professors and instructors. And I work a lot with our disability rights office. And so that's kind of where UDL has been implemented most into our university, is with those colleagues, as well as our teacher development program. So it's been really nice to see UDL from a different perspective, working with Paula at a different institution over the past few years.
Absolutely. I cannot agree more with you, Caitlin. And what I actually do at the Universidad de los Andes is I teach undergrads and master students, people who want to be teachers, so teacher certificate, and teachers doing their masters. And I've been, since, let's say, 2017 that I started working at the university, I've been using intuitively first and then studying more on UDL and making sure that I think about how to facilitate learning for everyone. And so it's now like a double mission to make sure that my students learn through UDL, but that they also learn how to use UDL when they go to be teachers in their schools or wherever they are. Yeah. So what we want to do today is to talk about what our AI positions are. And this is something that Caitlin is going to guide us through. Then we're going to talk about the UDL guideline expression and communication. We focused on consideration 5.3 and 5.2 and 5.3. And we want to share with you some examples using Magic to Do and the experience that I'm having customizing a chatbot for feedback. And so, Caitlin, the floor is yours.
And we'll have a couple opportunities for y'all to participate. We also have the chat open. So feel free to pop your thoughts in there at any point in the conversation, and we'll be checking that and addressing those. We'll also give everyone an opportunity, both in the middle as we're working with Magic to Do, and at the end to raise your hand and share your experiences or your thoughts with us. We wanted to start by talking a little bit about our AI positions, because we recognize that educators hold a lot of different positions or feelings about AI in education. And even in this Zoom room of about, I think, 50 people, there's probably a lot of variety in how everyone's feeling about AI, whether it's hopeful or critical, time poor, not having a lot of time to experiment with it, or very engaged, as Diana was saying. I think one of the most important things that Paula and I have been doing this year is trying to engage in dialogue with different people with different perspectives about AI, and then thinking about how we can incorporate all of those perspectives into kind of what we do as an institution. So we were inspired by Martin Compton's blog post about AI positions, where he outlines some of the positions he's seeing educators take. And it really shows how complex and nuanced the conversation is, rather than sort of black and white, either for AI, against AI, which it's sometimes presented in the media. So we both wanted to take a minute to share our current positions on AI, and then invite you to share your own in the chat. Paula's going to put a link in the chat. We created a genially set of flashcards inspired by Martin Compton's blog post, with the different positions that kind of describe how we sing each of these adjectives. And this is something that you could use in the classroom as well, to talk with students about their own positions, because we've also found that students have a variety of positions. So maybe Paula, I'll pass it over to you to talk about your position first.
Thank you, Caitlin. When I read through the positions, the descriptions, I kind of identified with all of them, but I think I'm more critical and open-minded to AI right now. And critical because I think the ethical considerations of using these tools are always present whenever I'm going to use, say, ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever tool there is. But I also think that there are possibilities in AI that I would like to learn to use and to make the most out of them. So I'm actually open-minded to conversations about the ethical considerations, but the potential of everything that has been developed so far. Those are my two.
I think similar to Paula, one of the adjectives that stood out most to me in his blog post was ambivalent. And he describes this as having a lot of cognitive dissonance or conflicting ideas that have created mental discomfort around AI. And I think a lot of this cognitive dissonance for me comes from being critical and concerned about how these tools, which weren't necessarily designed for education, are kind of being pushed on us as educators or institutions, and kind of who's driving the political discourse around AI right now. But at the same time, talking with students this year and previous years, students are sharing how they find some of these tools really useful for their own learning, their own research, their own studies. And so trying also to be open-minded to understanding how these tools can support learning in the ways that students are finding them most useful. So if we welcome everyone on the chat to share 2 to 3 adjectives that best describe your position on AI in education. If you're uncomfortable, because this meeting is being recorded, sharing, you can also send private messages to Paula and I, and we can read them out anonymously. But we'll just take a moment in the chat to let everybody share if you're comfortable. Oh, yes, and thank you, Andrea, for sharing the blog post as well. See, in the chat, I'm seeing Thomas is pragmatic, critical, and skeptical, cautious and hopeful and open-minded. So a lot of conflicting feelings as well. Open-minded, a lot of people, I'm seeing open-minded and hopeful pop up. So I think a lot of us hope that we can find ways to integrate these into education without being very mindful of those biases and the ethical concerns that Paula has talked about. Some critical, some skeptical. The responses are popping in very fast. Time poor, environmentally concerned. That's something that's come up a lot at our university as well. And there's a lot of conflicting information about that right now that sometimes makes it hard to wade through. Absolutely. Thomas says, ChatGPT, please choose 3 of the options in an optimized way and give a rationale. So this is also something that AI could do for us. Thank you, everybody, for sharing in the chat. The name of the writer was Martin Compton. And we can share, I'll share the blog post again in the chat, or Paula can. And Bree's come up with some other adjectives: accessible, preparative, dynamic. Absolutely. It's really nice to see that there's a lot of variety and that we can all come together in a space and have a conversation in an environment kind of where the discourse becomes more and more polarized, is what I'm finding, at least here in Europe. I'm going to shift now. Thank you for everyone who contributed. We're going to shift now briefly just to kind of talk about assessment and the things that we've been seeing in the classroom over the past few years and in the discourse. And I think a lot of what we've seen is a discussion about assessment security and GenAI, which essentially comes down to ensuring that students aren't using GenAI or other unauthorized aids when we think they shouldn't be using them. And so this has taken a lot of different directions in different places and different classrooms, whether it's asking students to document their process of using AI tools, trying to make assessments more authentic or relevant, and trying to increase intrinsic motivation so that students will do the work themselves. We've seen a lot of also going back to oral and pen and paper exams to try and improve assessment security. And from a UDL perspective, I think we've talked a lot of the problems with all of these, particularly the last, because it's really restricting the options students have to communicate or express what they know. So what we've been talking about at our Center for Teaching and Learning at CEU is thinking about security as just one principle of assessment, and that our goal should perhaps be trying to find a balance between many of these factors that make a good or effective assessment, whether that's validity. So is our assessment effective at measuring the course learning goals? Is it inclusive? Is it relevant to students' interests and goals for their education? Is it authentic? Does it mirror real world challenges and issues? And so those are all, we would say, equally important to considering whether it's likely students have completed the assignment themselves or with the appropriate or approved tools and aids. And I'm sure there's something on this list that's missing, so we'd also feel free to post something in the chat if you see there's other principles assessment that your institution is also seeing as an important part of this conversation. And so as Paula and I have been working on GenAI and UDL, we think that UDL's principle of action and expression is a really nice lens through which to view the debate we're having about assessment security and how assessment is changing in light of AI. So today we'll be focusing on 2 checkpoints, as Paula had said, from this part of the UDL framework. So we'll be focusing mostly on using multiple tools for construction, composition, and creativity, and building fluencies with graduated support for practice and performance. Throughout the conversation, we're also going to address some of the biases related to modes of expression and communication that we're seeing at our institutions. And so we'll start with checkpoint 5.2, which is using multiple tools for construction, composition, and creativity. And according to the CAST UDL guidelines 3.0, this is thinking about in an environment where there's access to a variety of tools. We can be co-designing environments where learners can explore and learn to use tools that are a good match between their preferences and the goals for the task. And so many responses to GenAI, whether it's through UDL or another framework, have gone back to thinking about assessment as a process rather than a product. And this is to discourage assessment design where students could just copy paste something generated by AI into a document. And so on Jody Black and Eric Moore's continuum of ways to offer assessment flexibility, this would primarily be in the middle, thinking about the composition of an assessment. But we think that looking at assessment as a continuum also allows us to examine areas where students might use a variety of tools and aids, including generative AI, throughout the assessment process. So this ranges for options to understand expectations for the assignment, options for preparation for the final assessment, options for assessment composition, for the method of assessment, and then for the outcome of the assessment itself. And thinking about AI, some examples that we're going to talk about and demonstrate. One is, for example, Magic To Do, which is a tool that we've actually both been using ourselves for breaking down complex tasks. So a lot of times when we give instructions for an assignment, some students might need more support trying to figure out how to break down that task and complete that task. And Magic To Do is one tool for that Paula's going to demonstrate in a minute. Another one that a lot of students here at CEU we're a very international school. And most students' home language isn't English, but we are an English language of instruction institution. So a lot of students have shared different ways they've used tools for helping with the composition of writing assignments, because we are also a very writing heavy institution. So for example, some students use speech to text for drafting outlines and essays because they find it matches their preferences to speak, and then to have something drafted and to be able to work with it from spoken text. And then a lot of students have been using tools like Grammarly for spell check and grammar. One thing we've been thinking about at CEU is what our role as educators are in the process of trying to help students navigate the new AI landscape. And so we've formulated this as our role as educators might be to work with students to choose the right tool, whether it's AI or not, for the task based on their individual preferences. But it's important that that tool doesn't do the work of learning for them. So it can support and scaffold their learning, but maybe not take away the actual work of learning, and for students to have some metacognitive awareness of that as well. One other important thing, and this goes back to the idea of bias, is to educate ourselves about the biases, data privacy, and accessibility considerations that go along with these tools as we're talking about them with students. So for example, in Europe, data privacy has been a really big issue because of some legal obligations through our GDPR Act. I think California has some really similar legal obligations in terms of educational technology. But one thing to do with students is to have students look at the default privacy settings for tools, so they understand if the data they're putting into the tools can be used for training or for other purposes by the companies who run them. So it's important to take some time to understand the settings of each tool and help students set them in a way that aligns with their situation, or tools that align with their privacy needs, recognizing that some may be more vulnerable. For example, we have some students from Russia who are very cognizant, if they're going to return to Russia after their studies, to keep their privacy needs or their information more private for political reasons. Another piece is accessibility. So some of these tools have been designed with accessibility in mind. We think Goblin Tools is one of these, but most haven't. And with most tools, there's a push to get something onto the market fast and then to sort of retrofit it for accessibility later. And then in terms of this sort of ableism baked into the user experience, we also talk a lot about the different biases baked into the training data and the output of these tools. And it's important to be mindful of that. Returning to checkpoint 5.4, it's also important to be mindful of some of the biases that are sort of baked into our expectations for how students express themselves. And kind of going back to this idea of being a very highly international university, a lot of students have expressed how useful Grammarly is for things like spell check, grammar, improving the written English, the tone, the coherence. At the same time, we've also been thinking about, does every assignment or assessment submitted need to have a quote unquote perfect level of English? Because then it's kind of pressuring students to use these tools to meet expectation, when a lot of times we may wish to prioritize like process and improving our written skills rather than submitting something that's perfect. And some students have kind of expressed discomfort with professors asking them to use these tools to improve their English. So focusing more on product more than process. And one thing going along with the tool Paula is going to demonstrate is also thinking about, there's very different ways that we can structure our thinking. And sometimes these tools kind of encourage a very linear structure of thinking or action. And so it's important to express to students as well, is that there's many different ways to express one's thinking, even if it doesn't align with sort of the logic of these tools. That being said, I think it's really important to try to balance offering a choice of tools and support, and also then challenging some of these practices or system in higher education that might not be inclusive. Paula I keep alluding to Paula's showing of tools. I'm going to pass it over to you to talk about Magic To Do.
Good, great, thank you, Caitlin. So you may already have the link to this page in Magic To Do, or you can use the QR code to go visit the page. And what I have been doing with my students so far is, well, let me tell you first, this is a class. This is a course on diversity and education for undergrad students who are getting their teaching certificate. And at the beginning of this course, a task called roots and seeds is the first thing they have to do. So what they need to do is to think about how they have learned about diversity and inclusion in terms of concepts, but in terms also on their experiences through life. If they have experienced exclusion, if they have different ways of seeing things, they need to express that in this task. And so the description of the task is very rich, as you can see. Yes, I can drop the link here. There it is. As you can see in the heading here on the first part, I actually, may I try to show this on my own screen? Let's see if I can share. Here. Okay, do you see better here?
That's good.
Bigger? Okay, thank you. And so what I did here was to have the whole description of the task for them to be able to break it down. So when they have this task, the first challenge is actually the expectation they have on how to express themselves. So we are used to have a task that is like a step-by-step, what to do, in what format, what color, what line, space, everything is scripted for students, or has been scripted for students so far. We know with UDL, we want to give students the opportunity to express themselves in different ways. So this task is a little bit overwhelming for students in general when they first face it. And using Magic To Do has been a good tool for them to break down the task so they know what to do, how much time they might need to take to complete each of the steps. And basically what you do is just, what I did was to put the description of the task here, as long as it can be, and ask Magic To Do to break it down. When it breaks down the task, you can actually decide how much detail on the steps you want. So I put 2 steps. They are indicated by this, they call it spiciness, which is really cool, I think. But you could have 5 or 6, I don't know, see, as many as 5 here. And you could break down the task in as many steps as you might need, which is really useful once you have experimented with the tool, because depending on the task, you might want to have more or less steps. And also, as I said before, you can determine how much time you're going to take into each of the steps. So I'm here breaking down this first step, and it's taking time. But so the first step may be also broken down in different mini steps, like find a nice place, breathe, remember, identify moments. If the person needs this detailed breakdown, it can be done. But it can also give you, I'm sorry, I'm breaking down this one instead of having the estimates. So you can, I'm actually deleting this. But you can decide here, estimate the time you need to work on this task, add a subtask, edit the task. You can do a lot just with this specific tool. But if you're using the whole suite, you can have the teacher up and explore.
So Paula, there's a
Mhm.
question from Tom Tobin in the chat about looking at the magic to do breakout of actions within the activity. How do you respond to colleagues who might perceive using this tool as hand-holding or dumbing down the activity for learners?
Yes, and that could be an issue, especially when you think people know what to do, and especially when you think that everyone is having the same way of solving things, but this is not the case. So I think especially it has been very useful for those who get overwhelmed with a lot of tasks. People with I have students diagnosed with anxiety, ADHD, and so the whole thought of completing this task gets very difficult for them. So in those cases, even breaking down things in smaller steps, talking to them is very useful. And for some other people who don't have those conditions and not even need this, they can just go ahead and work on their first draft. So I think it is hand holding when the person needs to be handheld, and it can be very independent depending exactly on the person. But I know I understand the concern, and I think it is a concern that we have and that we need to solve case by case.
And then
Mhm.
there's another comment in the chat, which I think you might want to address as well. So Susan Marie Harrington mentioned that this is a way to intersect with the literature on the TILT framework, the Transparency in Learning and Teaching framework, which this would be.
Yes, and so when we want to make thinking visible, this is a very good way to do it. When I don't understand what the student did to come to the final result, to the product, I can come back to what they did with Magic To Do and say, okay, what steps did you take? What did you do in each of the steps? And kind of recreate this thinking process and see exactly in what part of the process, let's say there was a mistake or misunderstanding that we can solve and resolve with them. So this is also, I think, a very good way to go to making thinking visible. I don't know that. Thank you, Thomas, for the
and thank you,
link.
Paula. Much appreciated.
I'll take it later. So yeah, I guess, or my take on these tools is they serve depending on your intention and the purpose of what you have in the classroom. So of course you can use this to facilitate learning, and facilitating learning means different things for different people, for different teachers and for different learners. And that's where the actual critical position is. How am I going to use this? Am I giving away my right to think? That has been my question that I've been sharing with Caitlin as well. Are there any more comments on this example? I would really love to hear more people. If not, I'm going to stop sharing the screen and continue. Okay, we'll still have more time to talk for sure. Oh, Caitlin, can you share the presentation again? Thank you.
And maybe the one really quick note I would add to that is one thing I like about it is that students don't need to register for the tool, so they don't need to create an account and give their information. But at the same time, I would caution students or anyone about loading anything too personal in this tool in terms of, because it's not exactly transparent where that data goes to me, and it is with a lot of these tools as well. I think it will save the data on your browser so that you could come back to the do list later, but it's like a lot of open source tools in that if you clear your browser history, then you'd lose your data because you haven't registered. So that's another thing too, to have students save the list once they've created it so they don't lose it later on if they're trying to reference it.
Awesome.
Sorry,
Yeah, Andrea,
Sola.
thank you. No, thank you, because that's one of the considerations we've been having with these tools, is how much the confidentiality part of what we're doing here. I can see the conversation here between Andrea and Thomas about how Magic To Do estimates the time to complete all tasks. I don't know the behind the scenes actually, and if there is information about that, that would be really good to know. I have no idea how the system does that. So can we continue? Yes. So the point 5.3 consideration build fluencies with graduate support for practice and performance relates to how we develop this fluency in terms of how much scaffolding people need to express themselves in the learning process, and how can we assist them in each of the process. So first, we're assisting them in preparing to be evaluated or assessed, let's say with this Magic To Do or any other tools you can find. I think at this point, there are many ways to break down tasks. But in terms of how we support their learning process at the end of the spectrum, meaning for the assessment and feedback, this is what I have been working on for, I guess, the last 2 semesters. I've been doing that with lots of learning, let's say. And I would like to share with you, first of all, in terms of the considerations I've had to get AI to support the way I do feedback for my students. And this comes from this paper from Henderson et al. 2025, which is very recent. And what they did, they were comparing, or they were looking for how students perceive the usefulness and trustworthiness of AI feedback. So through a survey in Australia, they ask people, actually students, how much they will rely on feedback given by teachers and by AI. And what they found is that both GenAI and teacher feedback are perceived as different sources of feedback. And they say, well, GenAI feedback is easier to access, more understandable. I guess we can tailor the tone and the grammar, and so it makes it easier for people to read. And it's also less risky, which I thought was very interesting, because there's no emotional attachment to what you read from GenAI compared to teacher feedback, which is a person talking to you, a person with whom you have a relationship. And so the emotional component is right there, but they also think that it is more helpful and trustworthy. And so it seems, after reading this, it seemed to me that combining both could be more powerful than having each of them separated. And so the challenge that they find, and I'm actually finding right now, is the leverage of the strength of both feedback modes, right? So if we as teachers can focus on the context, right, and the expert advice, and GenAI provide this accessibility and understandable information, then we can get more powerful on feedback and being more significant to students, I guess. So my need in terms of feedback is this. I'm going to share my needs here with you. So I have this course that I share with you, the diversity and education, that usually has up to 60 students. And as you could see the task, it's a very open task where they can express how they have learned about diversity and inclusion in different formats. So I don't think we included the menu here, but I have a 16 choice board for them to choose. Even if they have another option out of the 16, they can use it as long as they are following the criteria that we have. That means that the feedback and the assessment cannot be only a grade or an excellent, regular, or poor. It has to be meaningful, because when they write or create video, a podcast, or even knitting or a performance, they need this conversation, and I need that conversation with them. It takes a lot of time. So for each person, it has been taking me at least 45 minutes to complete, like read, think, write, proofread, and send it to the student. So multiply that for 60, it gets a lot of work. And so I wanted to see if AI could support that process and help me be faster, more effective, and meaningful. And so with I would call the Center for Teaching and Learning at Universidad de los Andes, I've been working on creating a chatbot for feedback for this specific task, roots and seeds, and for this specific course, only that. And this is what we have done so far. So, Caitlin, can you change the screen? Thank you. So we've been feeding the chat box with the instructions of the assignment, sorry. We had a rubric, and so we provided the rubric. Since I've been teaching this course for a long time, not a long time, actually, it's the third time I teach it. So I already have assessments. So I've been feeding the system with this assessment and with submissions, anonymized submissions, with the narrative assessments that I have given to other students. And we have tried to have a characterizations of the students, meaning that if I know the student from previous courses, which is the case, I have had some conversations with them, I know something about them that could help tailor this conversation with AI. This is in a very, the last characterizations of students is just starting right now. But the idea would be that it helps personalize this process. And so we have written the prompt many times, and we have been iteration, repeating the process. I don't remember how to say iterate. Anyway, so doing it once, iteration. Thank you, Thomas. And so we've been iterating. And what has been the challenge, the challenges have been, one, the nature of the assignment, having an open assignment with multiple ways to express themselves, then to tailor these chat box to access videos, pictures, collages, text. Text is the easiest, I guess. And so it was kind of, oh my God, this is a lot of information for the system to be able to read, but we've been trying to find out ways to the chat box to read that information. Then the assessment, having all these rubric, which is the easiest part, but then putting my own input in that assessment has been also challenging. And the most important, I would say, is the ethical considerations, thinking that very personal and profound information about students come out of these tasks. And people say how they experience exclusion or how they realize they were not heterosexual, or how they were discriminated against in some situations. So me, as a person, I was thinking, I don't want that information to be out in the space for people to read. How am I going to solve these before the students think that this is going to be exposed? And so one consideration has been actually not to upload the submissions to the chat box. And instead of that, me having a conversation with the chat box while I read and assess the submission has been useful. So the system doesn't get that information like the original, but my impressions. And based on that, then generates the assessment or the feedback narrative with what I've said and all the information that it has been fed with. And the other challenge is the time to curate this output. So I thought it would take long, or it would be irresponsible for me to not to read carefully whatever comes out of the chat box. And I thought this might take longer than actually writing myself. But what I have found is that once the training happens, the system gets very accurate in terms of my tone, the information it provides. And yes, I read the output, and I find that there are some things that I would like to add. And that information that I add makes it more close to me. I mean, like, I feel like I'm actually doing things, because I feel like I'm cheating if I am not participating in this process, of course. And the longest it has taken for me to go through this process with what I have already is 15 minutes. And so what I found is that it decreases the time that I used, 30 minutes. And that's huge for this process of assessing and writing the feedback. This is where we are right now. The next step, next semester in August, would be to try this out with actually this course, with these new students. And what I want to do is to present these experiments with them, see what they think, and with my team, ask them for consent. Who wants to participate in this assessment process supported by AI, and who just prefers not to, prefers being assessed just by Paula, and see what happens. This is very, in very early stages, but from the teacher perspective, from my perspective, I think it's going to be useful. And I've been trying to be as careful as I can with the way I'm providing information, or with the way I'm feeding the system, so it keeps confidentiality and it keeps my voice as well. What am I going to say? And the consideration in terms of biases is that the first thought from my team was, well, you could just have this task to be a written narrative, and it would be very easy for the chat box to help you, because that's the easiest. And I was like, you know what? No, my idea is to take care of this possibility of expression and having all these very rich narratives that are not only written. So trying to keep that as is, I'm trying to see how the rest of the system adapts to all the possibilities we're given to the students to express themselves. I would love to hear your comments and questions about my experience, and see if I can incorporate them to what I'm doing.
Do you want people to unmute and ask questions, or do you want them in the chat?
I think chat will be okay while Caitlin continues with feedback, if that's okay with people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we just got one more slide and then takeaways. So I think we just wanted to also preface this discussion about feedback into whether it's coming from instructor, peer, AI. One thing that we can continue to foster in our classrooms is encouraging students to practice asking for and using feedback. And I wanted to share really quickly, and I can put the link in the chat as well. I recently did a short course from the folks at Deakin University in Australia on Coursera about how to seek feedback effectively. And they highlighted many different sources we can go to for feedback, even beyond like instructor, peers, and AI. One that was new to me was keeping a log of all of the previous feedback you've received on other assignments or other pieces of writing, for example, and then looking at that feedback and applying it to like a new paper you're working on. And so I think continuing to think about if there's areas where students might need practice, either asking for prompting AI. I think there's a discussion of prompts we could use in the chat, and maybe we can talk about this as well in the last 10 minutes for getting effective feedback from AI. Another piece of the puzzle as well is that asking for feedback or using feedback is something that we can encourage students to build individual skills with, but at the same time, recognizing that we all exist in a specific social cultural context and community. So it's something that we can do individually to a certain extent, but it's also important then to consider the extent to which the learning environment fosters inclusive feedback practices. So there was a really interesting paper I came across by Mia Eminen and all about sort of situating feedback practices sort of in this overarching social cultural context, and what can change beyond just someone developing their own skills and practice for asking for and using feedback, that I thought was like a good counterbalance to think of this as something that's sort of an individual endeavor as a learner. And we can, again, post both of those in the chat as well. To give us enough time for questions and answers, we have our takeaway slides, and most of this is what we covered today. So assessment security is only one of the many factors we need to balance in light of AI. Students can meet learning goals in many different ways using many different tools at many different stages of the assessment process. And we hope that a couple of the tools we shared today resonate in terms of using GenAI. As educators, then our role is helping match students with and sharing student tools with students that might meet their preferences but don't outsource, but support the work of learning, and thinking through the different ways that AI generated feedback can complement instructor feedback, and that there actually may be situations where students prefer having it as an option in addition to feedback from the instructor. So thank you very, very much to everyone for joining us. I saw a lot of people in my time zone or close to my time zone where it's almost 9 p.m. So I'm really thankful to everyone in this part of the world for joining us as well and staying on the call into your evening. It was wonderful to see folks both in the US and internationally joining us today. And I think we welcome any comments in the chat. If Diane, have you seen any come up, and also for folks to raise their hand and unmute themselves and share something with us?
Yeah, we have about 7 minutes. So if people, you're getting a lot of positive feedback in the chat, and if people want to unmute, and if they're able to turn their video on as well, so we can see them, we would happily entertain questions for the last few minutes. So if you would, Caitlin, could you stop the screen share so we can see if anybody is trying to unmute? There was great conversation in the chat, and there are so many useful ways to use AI, both in course design and having it look at our assessments by asking it. Somebody asked about prompts, so prompting AI to say, you know, this assessment is for students in a biology 100 level first course they're going to take. Can you answer the questions from that perspective? And it really helps us to hone our assessments and the kinds of questions they ask. Same thing with discussion prompts. This, you know, how we use AI to mimic, so to speak, students to help us better create better assessments. That's one thing I think that is really helpful. Okay, so thanks for that, Amber. Amber wrote in the chat, I asked a question about the star format that she uses. So, and do people have questions specifically for our presenters? Feel free to unmute and we'll stay on for a few minutes more. It's very well received. Thank you both for your time. And 9 o'clock Eastern time, my eyes would be closing, Caitlin. So we really appreciate that you're awake and alert. That's a good thing. Yeah. So I'm not seeing
I
anybody.
did have one question earlier on that I said we'd address about like the accessibility in a lot of these tools. And I think what I've been seeing as a technologist is a lot of tools that didn't have sort of a stake in AI, whether these are like edtech tools or new tools popping up. There's very much sort of a race to get in the market and to get brand recognition. So a lot of times they're built very quickly and without kind of doing due diligence in terms of accessibility with the user interface. And so a lot of the AI features may not yet be accessible to people using screen readers, for example. A lot of tools I've noticed have poor color contrast choices because the folks designing them maybe aren't as familiar with accessibility principles. And so I think when I was talking about ableism, I think there's absolutely a lot to be said in terms of the data some of these tools are trained on, like the large language models, but also thinking about the user interface and how they might privilege the people who are using the tool, like a lot of tools even that aren't sort of AI oriented privilege kind of visual communication, for example. And so I think that's one thing to scope out as you're recommending tools to students or experimenting with them, that not all of them may be accessible for everyone, and to kind of pressure these companies to make their tools accessible as well before we integrate them into educational spheres.
Yeah, so there's there's a comment in the chat about with new tools, the poor use of semantic elements, missing input labels, missing or misused tags. And certainly accessibility is huge. What I've seen, Caitlin, to your point, is stuff that comes out quick on the market, and then you'll see maybe a year or more later, you'll see more and more accessibility features coming in. At least that's what I've observed, particularly with one of my favorite tools, which is not AI, but Padlet, which
I
now
was thinking of the same thing, Padlo, Miro, a lot of these.
Yeah, they really have come a long, long way. Padlet now will do captioning for you. So it's huge step ahead. Other comments, questions? Yeah, the issues are complex for sure. Students opting out of AI, given ethical and environmental issues. I don't know that we're seeing that at our school, but we're seeing students really experimenting with it, and not always in the most ethical ways. Yeah. So other thoughts? All right. Well, once again, I want to thank our presenters. This was really great session, and the tools. I had already gone to Goblin Tools and I'm looking at that. I think there's a lot of benefit to the task analysis available for students when we give them big assignments. So thanks to you, Paula. Thanks, Caitlin. Please stay in touch. We'd love to talk more about what we're doing at Goodwin. So thank you again, and thanks everybody. And I think we're all set here. So take care, everybody, and enjoy whatever is left of your day. Or if you're on your way to bed, good night. So see you all soon. See you next time.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.